everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's so incredibly humid out there. I hate it. It's a lot cooler inside. Not very nice. It's a bit humid out. So yeah, I'm gonna carry on reviewing the Invisible Doctrine for where I got up to last time. As I say, this will take quite a number of videos, so bear with me, and I hope to do a comments video when I get to the end. So yeah, so I just got up to the bit where George Monbiot was saying that neoliberalism really represents class war, in other words, the consolidation of capital at the expense of the majority of people. It's not really a free market in the true sense of the word, because it's very much about the state controlling the lives of ordinary people. The only people who have freedom under neoliberalism really are the rich and powerful. Yeah, he talks about rent. Now, rent, which is a very has a very big role in neoliberalism. Rent is essentially unearned income. It's a private tax that the owners of a property can charge. In other words, it's surplus value over and above the concrete resources, you know, the real value, say, of land. Well, rent is the surplus value which has no bearing on, it's the extra you pay, which really has absolutely no bearing on the service that you're actually getting. It's over and above what you'd pay for the actual concrete service. Privatisation is essentially legalised theft from the public realm, and that's what rent represents. Privatisation leads to a decline in the quality of public services, as the owner's incentive is to extract as much money from the service as possible. For example, charging higher fees, or diverting the money that should have been invested in improving the service into their own pockets. Legalised theft. Essential but unprofitable aspects of a service are dumped. For example, bus services to smaller towns are slashed because they might help people, they might benefit people, but because they're not profitable. They're not seen as worthy of being saved. This is all about profit. Anything that is not seen as profitable gets slashed. Another form of rent is interest. Interest is the access fee that is charged for use of another essential resource, which is money. So interest, I'll say it again, interest is the access fee charged for use of money, which is another essential resource. Investment means two entirely different things. One, the use of money to create socially useful services that did not previously exist. So that is socially constructive investment. Investment in real concrete material assets, essentially. But another meaning of the word investment is to capture and milk assets that are already in existence. So, for example, a private company might invest in housing without paying for a single brick. And in this instance, it means buying existing buildings to charge rent. By confusing enterprise with rent, the word investment disguises this extractive activity. It treats construction of what is essentially a toll barrier as genuinely productive occupation. Today, no one wants to be seen as a rentier, which is basically an economic parasite living off the work of others. But those who make money from rent seek to pass themselves off as entrepreneurs. For example, people like Trump, who inherited wealth and then used it to build businesses based on fleecing those who work for their living. They insist they achieved their dominance via hard work and enterprise, but they didn't. It's a lie. Neoliberalism valorizes competitive enterprise, but in reality, rewarding established wealth that controls crucial assets, for example land, by rent seeking. This created a bonanza for those who parasitise genuine enterprise, privatising public services. Ironically, investors, in inverted commas, must always be rescued by the state, and this insulates them from risk. You'd be thinking, well, surely if it's a truly free market, the state wouldn't rescue them. I mean, surely that's what free market is, isn't it? If they fail, they fail. But that's the whole point of neoliberalism. That's where the neo bit comes in from. It's only free up to a point, but they expect the state to rescue them, to insulate them from risk, and they also expect the state to control the population to prevent any real protest against neoliberalism. So, paradox, on the one hand rolling back part of the state, which really is just the welfare arm of the state, but on the other side of the equation, the state will rescue the neoliberals, will protect the neoliberals, will protect them, and will also be incredibly oppressive and coercive against the general population as well. So public services can't be allowed to collapse completely for fear of unrest. So there comes a point where the state intervenes to hold things together. So again, the book talks about the rise of social democracy. So between the sort of 1940s to the late 1970s, wealth, rights and freedoms for ordinary people increased exponentially. This was known as the so-called golden age of capitalism. Golden age in inverted commas, because of course there's no such thing as a golden age really, and that's kind of sort of mythological sort of wording. But the sort of idea being that, generally speaking, that was a good decade for the vast majority of people in a developed world, bear in mind, it's not the developing world. We're talking here just about rich countries. Standard of living increased quite significantly for most people during that time. And this was due to the redistributive policies of John Maynard Keynes. More equal distribution of wealth enhanced spending power of those who previously lived in poverty, and this boosted their demands for goods, and that led to growth. However, it's important to bear in mind that the steady rise of prosperity in the global north was heavily financed by the global south. It would not have been possible were it not for the exploitation of the global south. It's got to be borne in mind. Decolonisation in the global south was resisted with violence. For example, there were coups and assassinations. A notable example of that is Pinochet's overthrow of Salvador Allende in Chile in 1973. Pinochet's economic programme was overseen by neoliberal economists, and those who resisted were tortured. Unrestrained by democratic resistance, American and European corporations in Chile were free to take what they wanted. Now this was justified with the rhetoric of the Cold War, defending a Western sphere of influence against Soviet expansionism, but its purpose was to secure resources for dominant capitalist powers, stripping entire populations of political agency. I'd also add, by the way, that the redistributive policies of John Maynard Keynes' regulatory welfare capitalism was also it wasn't completely benevolent in the sense that it was quite strategic. Because this was the time of the Cold War, and there was kind of a sort of competition between capitalist countries and the communist bloc. And the idea was that, by shoring up people's standard of living, there'd be less likelihood of revolt because they feared the possibility that people would, essentially, basically they feared communism. So there was that as well, kind of cynical need to kind of raise people's standards of living in that sense as well. It wasn't all, benevolence. One of the distinguishing features of the Keynesian era, is that a greater number of people in the global north got to dip their fingers in the stack of stolen goods. Because as I said, again, bear in mind that this increased prosperity really was only made possible by exploitation of the global south. It's just that between the 40s and the 70s, an increasing number of ordinary people in the developed world had access to this stolen wealth, basically. At no point has the fundamental condition of capitalism been altered. It is an economic system founded on colonial looting. The difference now is that people in the developed world, increasingly, in the rich countries, are now being denied access to that wealth, which is now being concentrated in the hands of an increasingly small number of people. But it's always been stolen wealth. Even when the majority of people in the developed world had access to it, it was only made possible by colonisation. That's what people often forget. During the so-called glory years, economic life in the rich nations was fairer than ever before, but relations between rich and poor nations during the Keynesian era remained unjust and coercive. Neoliberalism ensured economic life was unjust. However, neoliberalism ensured that economic life was unjust and coercive everywhere. It's the main difference. So previously, people in the rich developed world were kind of insulated from that coercion, from that violence. Neoliberalism is now basically ensuring that no matter where you live, you're going to experience, and if you're not rich, of course, you're going to experience some degree of coercion. It's now being played out everywhere. And even within the richest nations. Neoliberals claim economic efficiency and investment would rise, enriching everyone, and kind of trickle-down economics. But the opposite, of course, has occurred. As taxes on the wealthy have been diminished, the spending power of both the state and the poor has contracted, reducing economic demand, so you end up with lower growth. So growth is slower under neoliberalism, and any growth that does occur has been captured by the rich. Okay, so now I'm going to move over to video number 2 to carry on going over the main points that are raised in this book here, the Physical Doctrine. So moving over to video number 2 now.